So you'll notice that after I finish with our presentation, at the bottom of your screen, if you're using a regular Windows browser, you should have something that shows Q&A. So as we go through the presentation, after we finish, you'll have the opportunity to click on Q&A and a box will pop up and you'll be able to enter a question into there. My moderators will be helping me with the Q&A and we'll be bringing questions forward so that I can answer them. We'll also be typing the answer to them and capturing them as a part of this as well. So when we publish this, we'll also make the Q&A available too. So this is really intended to provide just a summary of the plan. It's a synopsis. It's a high-level overview. Our full plan is posted on our website. And I would also mention, please check back regularly for updates. As you can imagine, with anything like this, there are regular changes. And so we're trying to keep our website updated on a minute-by-minute basis as things evolve and change. So to create this plan, we went through, it was a short period of time, but a long process. So we launched a couple of surveys. They were one for parents and students and another one for staff. We used the information that was made available from those surveys and combined that along with information we received from focus groups so that a core team of people could analyze that data and then develop our plan. Our plan was finalized and then posted on the 31st in time for the deadline. And as we know, the governor did make an announcement to reopen our schools. And so right now we're in that period of implementing our final plan. And just to give you an idea, in addition to all of the participants that we had as a part of those focus groups and surveys, I had a core team of 22 people, representative from across the district, who came together and worked for 3 days on developing the plan that I'm reviewing with you. And though that group of people took survey responses from over 2,300 people and over 270 participants in focus groups and tried to take our federal and state guidelines to develop a plan collectively that met the needs for the most of what we heard as a part of that feedback. We started with some non-negotiables, and the non-negotiables were driven either from things we heard in focus groups or things that we knew from accountability perspective that we had to meet. So for example, we knew that learning had to follow a daily schedule. When we initially closed last year in March and students started learning remotely, there wasn't necessarily always a fixed schedule. Going into this new school year, we knew that there had to be a fixed daily schedule. We also knew that there had to be 180 days of instruction. That's required by regulation. And that also daily and class period attendance would be required. And that's a little bit different again than what we did after the initial school closing. But as we reopen our schools, attendance will be required. Our curriculum is intended to be spiral. We know that there will be times where we have to go back and revisit things from the prior year in order to build on them and build new sets of understanding. We wanted to make sure that parents were given a choice, either into a hybrid or virtual school. And we wanted to make sure that they had the ability to commit for at least 10-week intervals. And that at some point, regardless if you're coming in person or attending virtual, anybody could be shifted to completely virtual, given the fact that our schools could in the future close down again. We also asked everyone as a part of their feedback, and I'm going to ask you the same too, to allow for flexibility. Schenectady City Schools, like every other school in the state and the country, has never had to open a school before amidst the pandemic, at least not in the last 100 years. So we're learning a lot of these things as we go. And that means that there are going to be times where things evolve or change quickly. And we're doing it with the best of intentions. And a lot of times we know that we want specific answers to things. We're going to do our best to work through them as quickly as possible. But there might be times where we might not know the answer or we might have to change. Just because it was this way in the beginning, it might evolve over time, especially as needs evolve too. So the major components of the plan that I'm going to review today are each of these different sections: family and community engagement, health and safety, facilities, child nutrition, transportation, school schedules, childcare, technology, and connectivity. And after I go through this, there'll be a chance for you to enter your questions around any of those or things that you might not see here into the Q&A section. So parent student choice. I mentioned it before, it was a non-negotiable. We sent out a survey with a deadline of last Sunday for you to commit for your kids, whether or not you wanted a hybrid or a virtual academy. And that was so that we could begin planning and creating schedules so that we had an opportunity to schedule regarding how students were going to be attending school in the fall for at least the first 10 weeks. We also thought it was extremely important to have family and community engagement, not only as a part of creating the plan, but also to enact it too. We need your help. We know that in order for this to work, whether it's an in-person model, our hybrid model, or even if it is our virtual model, our partnership with you is going to be key to the success. And so included in this plan is a dependency on us all working together in order to make this happen. We also collaborated very closely regarding health and safety with guidelines provided by the Centers for Disease Control, the New York State Department of Health, the State Education Department, Capital Region BOCES, and probably above all else, the Schenectady County Department of Health. They were certainly partners with us every step along the way in creating our plan and making sure that it was going to meet the health and safety requirements for our students. I will mention, as a part of health and safety, and this is an area I want to make sure I spend sufficient time on because it's an important part of our school reopening. Anyone attending for a hybrid version, our in-person version, they will have a daily health check and screening every time that they arrive. And that includes staff and students both. So temperatures will be checked, and those questions that we're all getting familiar with asking regarding our health will be asked each and every day. And that would be the same for any visitors, contractors, and vendors that are coming to the building. I would mention around visitors, we're going to be limiting visitors coming into the building just so that we can also reduce the number of people coming into the building. All of our plans take into account the requirement for social distancing of at least 6 feet, the use of face coverings and other PPE. And there might be times where we ask for social distancing of greater than 6 feet. And an example of that might be like band or orchestra. There might be a requirement of 12 feet or more. And those are taken into account as well as a part of our plan. It also takes into account infection control strategies, what would happen if someone came and they went through a screening and we found that they did have an elevated temperature, how we would handle that situation. Plumbing, and an example of plumbing might be, there could be times where bathroom stalls are being shut off, every other stall, just to allow for that distancing, or even certain water fountains where we've closed them off because of cleaning, and we want to make sure that we have just the right number open and available for students to be able to access that's sufficient. We've also have a focus on ventilation. I'm going to get into that a little bit more, how we would manage people who become symptomatic, and then contact tracing, monitoring, and COVID testing. And I'm going to speak a little bit more to that too, because I know that that was a topic of discussion that was brought up, and especially during the governor when he brought up that requirement for us. And again, luckily, we had already been having those ongoing conversations with the Schenectady County Department of Public Health. But COVID testing, if COVID testing was required, I want to be clear in saying that the Schenectady City School District will not be conducting COVID testing. It's not something we would be doing on site. If somebody showed up and were seen as being symptomatic, we would refer them to their primary care provider, to an urgent care, or to the Schenectady County Department of Public Health so that they could be directed somewhere for testing. It would not happen on site here, but it would certainly happen someplace within the city or the county. And then the same goes for contact tracing. Schenectady City Schools is going to do its part to know who has entered a particular room of the school or location of the school at any given point during the day. So should there be a case where someone is not only symptomatic but tests positive, that we have the ability to work with the Department of Public Health and handing over to them all of that information so that they can begin the contact tracing process. So that's very much how our process would work at the school district for confirmed or suspected cases. And delving into the facilities piece a little bit more, cleaning and disinfecting is something that would happen at an increased level. You'll notice when I look at our student schedules in just a little bit, we've even altered them to allow for an additional layer of cleaning than we would normally do on a regular basis. We've also looked to increase ventilation. What that means is if we have mechanical ventilation, ventilation that's being brought in by some sort of forced air system, we have a minimum of a 25% fresh air intake. But also we're looking to have any classes that students will be in an exterior facing room with windows that can open in order to allow for that fresh air intake to come into the room and increase ventilation. All desks will be placed 6 feet or greater apart. Water fountains, as I mentioned before, will be limited in its use. Same thing with toilet stalls, and we would also do modified fire or lockdown drills. We're still required to do them as a school district. They might look a little bit different than what we normally do, but we want to do them in such a way that we can teach the protocol or the practice of a fire drill, but still ensure social distancing as a part of doing it. And as students return and staff returns, they'll start to notice too, we'll have increased signs around the building. And it could be anything, of course, from those frequent reminders about the importance of wearing a mask, social distancing, hand washing, but you might also even notice on our floors that there are directional signs in the direction that you should be walking in the hallway. Just those constant reminders to help keep things the way they need to. As far as child nutrition goes, and that really is pertaining to breakfast and lunch in our schools, we have a plan to not serve any meals in school. And we're doing that in order to also limit the amount of possibility for spreading of infection. We will be sending every student home, however, with their lunch for today and their breakfast for tomorrow, with the intent that they'll be able to eat them at home. Any students who are participating in the virtual school will have the ability to pick up their lunch and breakfast for the next day at a designated site. And we'll be sharing what those sites are so that you have an opportunity to see them as we get closer to the school opening. Transportation, we know, is necessary for a number of our students to get to school. You'll expect at least a reduction of 50% or more on school buses. It'll be somewhere between 33 to 50% of the students. We're looking to do routing by class or building. So in the past, you might have been mixed up with others within your building or other schools. We want to limit that just so that we have the ability of being able to do more contact tracing, like I mentioned before, should there be a case where, or a suspected case where we need to do contact tracing. We, as a part of our survey, also encouraged families, if at all possible, to do drop-offs, just so that we can increase the capacity to the extent possible of students that we can accommodate on buses. Face coverings will be required on buses. We'll have windows or hatches open if the weather permits, and that's usually as soon as temperatures get below 45 degrees, it becomes a little bit more difficult to do that. But while time allows, we will be looking to increase ventilation on buses too. There will be seating charts, and we'll also have plans for how students load and unload from the buses, just again, in order to be able to limit the interaction amongst different groups of students. Some sample school schedules for you. And this is just in an effort to share with you what it might look like. And we're still firming this up. But for those attending in person for our hybrid model, they would come at the elementary level for core instruction in the morning with a dismissal between 11:45 and noon. They'd leave with their lunch for today and their breakfast for tomorrow and travel home, eat their lunch, and then finish their afternoon off virtually. So every student would have access to, if they don't have it at home, the ability to have a Chromebook loaned to them so they have the ability to finish their day virtually. And what that allows for us in either of these models at the elementary level or at the secondary level is the ability to also do that increased level of cleaning that we talked about, while also reducing any kind of risk associated with the sharing of food or food even being present. So at the secondary level, a dismissal would be between 12:25 and 12:40. And again, students would travel home and finish out their day in a virtual classroom at home. For students who are attending completely virtually, their schedule would be somewhat the same. It would still be a period schedule, exactly like you're seeing here, or a class-based schedule, and it would be based on a time frame for which students would be expected to be logged in and receive synchronous training or synchronous classes, meaning that when they're logged in, they're going to be in front of a teacher on a camera, along with other peers as well too, participating in a lesson or instruction for that day, each and every day. Class sizes in our virtual academy, what I said here is run at capacity. What that means is class sizes in our virtual academy will be somewhere around 25 to 30 students, depending on the grade level of the subject. In some cases, maybe slightly more. Also, students attending virtually, as I mentioned before, they would have synchronous classes daily based on their assigned schedule. If you're in hybrid instruction, you're going to see a reduced class size to allow for social distancing. So it could be around 12 or 13 at the lower grade levels to up to at the higher grade levels around 15 or so. And students would attend, as I mentioned before, in person for the morning and do synchronous virtual classes for the afternoon based on their assigned schedule. So for in-person days, for hybrid classes, Monday through Friday, we've prioritized students who are English language learners, self-contained classes, pre-K, grades K through 6 and 8 through 9. And then students who are in grades 7, 10, and 11 would come on alternating weeks. And I'll tell you right now, we're looking at this a little bit more closely based on the numbers of responses that we've received to our survey around those attending in person for the hybrid model versus attending the virtual model. There's a chance where we could be looking to shift this a little bit more towards that Monday through Friday schedule across the board, but more to come on that. We're still starting to dig into that data. And then lastly, grade 12, you'll notice that that's in the middle. That's in the middle because depending on the specific need of the senior, there might be a need for them to be here every day, or if they are able to have a reduced schedule of an A week or a B week. So the way that an A week, B week would work if we went with that model would be that half of the students would come for 1 week while the other half is at home learning remotely, and then they would swap the second week. The B week would be where the other half of the students are in person, and the kids who were just in person would then be at home learning remotely. We recognize, of course, that childcare is something that could be a concern for families. We've partnered with the Boys and Girls Clubs right next door to us. They have various locations across the city too. There is some information that will be posted to our website about the Boys and Girls Club as well as the YMCA. We're in the process of finalizing both of those for childcare options for either before or after school. And then lastly, Bright Side Up, which I have listed at the bottom, formerly known as the Capital Area Council for Childcare. They're a great resource too and have many low cost options available. They'll work with families regardless of the circumstances on being able to find appropriate and affordable childcare. Technology and connectivity, I mentioned before, that's going to be paramount for us regardless of what model you choose, because even if you're attending in person, there's still a virtual component, hence that hybrid model. And likewise, at some point, there is that eventuality, of course, where we could all be completely virtual. We want to make sure that every kid is outfitted with a Chromebook if they don't have access to a device at home, and Wi-Fi as well. And the district is equipping itself to be able to assist additional families with those things. So stay tuned for additional information if that's something that you need to request. We are planning on, during the first week of school, having several places in which families would be able to come to be able to get a device, or if they have one that isn't working and it needs a repair, to swap it out for one that is in working condition. So some next steps for us before we open up for Q&A. I like to point out that we only have 25 work days to implement the plan that we're putting into place. And I mentioned that only to give you some perspective about what we have in front of us. It's a significant amount of work for us to do. We have never really prepared for the opening of school and the creating of a schedule in 25 days for 10,000 students. That's something new for us. So I would ask also for your patience and helping and understanding as we start to work our way through each of these things. We're going to continue to engage stakeholders in the process, and while the governor required us to have 3 Q&A sessions, I want to continue to offer these, especially as things evolve. I think that this is a good opportunity for us to be able to also engage. We'll also be updating Q&A on our website as we get closer to the start of school too. The school option questionnaire that was completed by families that I mentioned before by August 9th. We also made phone calls to families, but I want to point that out because any family we haven't heard from, and it's a small number at this point, any family we haven't heard from, we're going to be sending you a letter. It's in the process of coming in the mail right now, just letting you know that we've defaulted you to the all virtual option. And if that doesn't work for you, there'll be a number for you to contact if you want to make a change. So we're working with staff right now on necessitating any accommodations. We're finalizing schedules for students and teachers and hoping to have those available later in August. And we're also looking at some potential adjustments to the school calendar. We want to maximize our time with staff with upfront training that's required for the opening of school. So there is a possibility you'll be seeing in the next week or so that we may be delaying the first day of instruction for kids to the following week than what we had intended. It's the same number of days of instruction. We would just be shifting around some of our superintendent's conference days to have them at the front part of our schedule rather than throughout the year. So more information to come on that. I do want to open it up for questions. I'm going to have my panelists help me with that and providing what those questions are. But I do want to mention to you, as we answer them, I'm going to answer them. They're going to type them in so that they show up so that we can also share them later. But if you think of something later that you didn't get to ask here, Let's Talk is an amazing resource on our website. I want to point that out to you because we also have a team of people answering questions, and you should feel free, even if you don't get your question asked or answered here, to be able to do that at a later time. And that's available 24/7 on our website. So I'm going to go ahead now and open it up for questions. Panelists, can you help me?
First question, how will BOCES classes like cosmetology, electrical trades, mechanics classes work where hands-on is essential?
So great question. How will BOCES classes work? And I'm repeating it just to make sure that everyone who's listening can hear the question too. How will BOCES classes work, especially ones that require hands-on work, like cosmetology, for example? In those types of scenarios, we're going to also put social distancing in place. If it's a scenario too, where students do need to be closer for some reason, we would still expect that any kind of PPE isn't worn or in place. And for some of them, because they're not necessarily courses that we offer, but rely on BOCES, as indicated even in the question, we're waiting for BOCES to also finalize their plan and their schedule around them too, so that we can share that with you. And that is posted on their site, but like us, they're finalizing them too. But we would certainly be putting into place those same types of protections that we would expect in any other class.
There are other districts going for a full day. Why is that not an option for Schenectady? This is very difficult for any parent to be able to go to work.
Mhm. So the question is, why aren't we doing full days? And I know that that is a struggle. We've heard mixed things about the full day piece of it. We opted to do the schedule the way that we did in order to maximize the amount of time that our teachers had in front of students. And we wanted to make sure if you looked at some of those other schools, most of the full day options are because kids are coming just certain days. We've tried to create an option where you have kids coming every day and hence maximizing the amount of time for core instruction for students and also maximizing the amount of time that we have available to clean the buildings each evening before kids come back the next day.
What happens in the winter when it's freezing outside? How would you leave the windows open?
So in the wintertime, I think that that's something that what happens in the wintertime when we can't keep the windows open, we will definitely, as we get closer to that time, have to pay closer attention to the combination of both heat and fresh air ventilation and how we're accommodating for that. And we at that point may have to introduce some type of mechanical ventilation that allows air to still be able to circulate in the classroom and exchange fresh air for the air in the classroom.
What about lunch for seventh graders, the hybrid that do both virtual and school every other week?
Okay, so lunch for anyone who's attending either virtually 100% of the time or on a rotating schedule would still be able to get lunch at one of many sites that will have available for pickup of lunch across the city. So it'll still be something that they're able to access even if they're not here in person.
How will instrumental classes like piano work virtually?
So how would instrumental classes work, like piano, for example? Any kind of instrumental classes, we're still working out what that might look like. And in some cases, there could still be in-person options for them. In cases where they're virtual, we would work our best. Our teachers are amazing at trying to come up with creative ways to still be able to accomplish them. In the case of our own instrumental music classes, I mentioned before, there are lots of plans that we're still finalizing, and in some cases, we're trying to do our best to, depending on the type of instrument, even add greater distances. So it could be a type of thing if it were band or orchestra, where we could still see it happening in person, but it might be a socially distanced space of 12 feet or more.
Would there be flexibility for virtual students if they need to travel frequently between two locations during the school day?
So would there be flexibility for virtual students if they need to travel frequently between two locations? I think I would need a little bit more information to understand the question, but in short, what I would say is that virtual students will have a class schedule just like our in-person students will. So they will have the same type of expectation to be logged in for each class at a particular time to attend for that time.
How will kindergarten work in the mornings for virtual academy? Will kindergartners be attending a synchronous class virtually in the mornings?
So will kindergartners be attending virtual classes in the morning if you're opting for the virtual option? The short answer is yes. All of our students will be attending, if you're in the virtual academy, a synchronous class each and every day. It is different, very different than what we experienced in the fall with a lot of asynchronous learning. This is more of the type of instruction that you would expect to happen with a teacher in a class, but just in a virtual environment.
If children go to childcare, how would they be able to do the virtual part of the class for the second half of the day?
So great question. If you have to go to childcare for the second part of the day, how are you going to do your virtual classes? I can tell you with the partners that we're working with, they know that that's a variable and are making sure that they have spaces set up for kids to engage in any kind of virtual coursework that they might need to do for the afternoon. But if you're seeking childcare, make sure that they understand that that is a component of the day that students would have to do, just so that they understand that too.
If we are new to the district and have selected hybrid, will we be able to tour the school?
So if you're new to the district and you've chosen hybrid, I would say reach out to the principal. We're limiting people coming into the buildings right now, but there's no reason why we couldn't do a virtual tour for you. We'd love to take you through the building, but it might be through FaceTime or some other type of virtual activity. We want to do that right now just to limit the number of people coming into our schools. And especially as we disinfect areas, it's helpful to keep them as clean, safe areas without interrupting them.
If you choose hybrid and need to switch to virtual learning, is that a possibility, and how will that work?
So if you choose hybrid and you need to switch at some point to virtual, that's a little bit easier for us to accommodate, but we are asking for people to commit to schedules for a quarter at a time. So a quarter is a 10-week period. And at each 5-week interval, so in the first 10 weeks, at the 5th week, we would be sending something asking people to commit to what their second 10 weeks would look like. We're doing that because, of course, we have to create schedules and staffing for those schedules that we can accommodate. So we are asking for people to stay with them for a 10-week period of time. If something extraordinary came up and we needed to be able to work with parents to be flexible with that, we would, of course, on a case-by-case basis want to be able to do that. But would ask again for the 10 weeks would be most appreciated.
Do you know when we will find out more information regarding teachers or school supplies? Also, will there be any type of orientation for kindergartners?
So regarding information for teachers and school supplies, that'll be coming out as a part of our schedules. Normally by now, as you know, we would have had that already done, but because of the unique nature of the year, we're really recreating schedules from scratch. So in the next couple of weeks, we hope to have that information out and available to you. Please be patient with us. We'll get it to you as quickly as possibly that we can. We'll also make sure that we communicate that out so that you know that it's available. Regarding orientation for kindergarteners, I don't want to commit to it to say it 100%. We might look to do something virtually, which is different than what we've done before, but it's going to be dependent upon, of course, our readiness to bring people back. I would say because of the unusual circumstance for this year, it might look very different than it has in the past, and it might even be something that happens at the very start of school rather than prior to school starting.
Will school supplies be shared this year, meaning school materials, will kids be sharing them?
So we want to limit the amount of supplies that are shared by kids, but I don't want to say that that's never going to be the case. In a case where a supply or an item needs to be shared, we want to make sure that the proper cleaning protocols are put into place so that that could happen, but we would be limiting that to the largest extent possible. And there are some things, of course, for which we wouldn't want students to share. Musical instruments is one that certainly comes to mind right away, but anything else where there could be an increased risk for health or safety, we would be looking to avoid that to all extent.
I see that Fulton is mentioned in the plan. Is that building going to be reopened? Is pre-K moving there?
So Fulton is mentioned in our plan. That is correct because it is a building that is owned by the district, and we didn't know whether or not it was going to be a space that we would have to use or evolve into using based on the fact of how many students we had. Right now, preliminarily, it doesn't look like we will have to use that, but I don't want to completely discount it. If our numbers necessitated us needing to expand to another site, we could potentially look at moving either pre-K as an option, certainly, of course, or another type of program or an entire grade level. But right now, preliminarily, based on our numbers, it doesn't look like that's something we would necessarily have to entertain. But it's still sitting there as an option, so I don't want to discount it.
Will one of the aftercare programs be based at an elementary school?
So will one of the after programs be based at an elementary school? No, our buildings will not have any after programs, which is why we're partnering with our community-based agencies in order for us to conduct the level of cleaning and disinfection that needs to happen at the end of each day. We do need our buildings to have students out after dismissal. So there will not be any aftercare happening at any of our school buildings.
Will you eventually be going full-time?
Will we be eventually going full-time? I would love to say yes, absolutely. And of course, that's the intent after this pandemic is done for us to go back to full-time. But also I would say too, that if the schedule works and we're able to get things to a place where we're able to evolve to a full day schedule, we would certainly explore that as an option too.
How many students have you heard from, and what is the ratio of hybrid versus virtual?
So right now we have heard from about 8,000 students, close to 8,000 students. So we're close to hearing from most, and we've been reaching out to those we haven't heard from. And the ratio right now of hybrid versus virtual, we have about 40% of families choosing the hybrid or in-person option, and around 60% choosing the completely virtual remote option.
Will normal grading be reinstated?
So the grading practices is something that we haven't necessarily had a chance to talk about with our teachers yet, but we would anticipate that with a more normal approach to school, even though the setting might look different, that our grading practices would look more akin to what they looked like prior to the closing of school.
Is the high school still planning on having an orientation day?
So the high school right now, because we're looking at potentially changing the days at which we might start instruction, it would preclude our ability from having an actual full day of orientation. So it means that students would be starting all on the same day. And potentially, like I said before, it was supposed to be the 8th. It could potentially be moving to the 14th.
Will there be any school-based after-school programs like there were last year? And in parentheses, even for students with disabilities, I see that there are options for outside of school programs.
So likewise, to the question about aftercare programs, we won't have any after school programs in our schools. We do still intend on having after school programs, but we'll intend to the extent possible run them virtually, and that would include clubs as well.
How will I know if my kids are going to be all online?
So you would know if your kids are going to be all online based on the option you chose. And the two options, as I mentioned before, were either the virtual, which is all online, or the hybrid option. If we haven't heard from you, as I mentioned before, and this is worth repeating too, if we haven't heard from you, we've defaulted you to the virtual option. And you'll be getting a letter in the mail stating that, but also the letter will let you know if you have an issue with that and need to make a change, the process by which you can do that.
When you state increased cleaning, can you outline the type of cleaning? Should we expect every classroom will be cleaned every day?
So to outline additional cleaning, and can we expect that every classroom will be cleaned every day? Great question. So to think that we might be able to clean the restroom, for example, after every student uses it between each use, wouldn't be something practical for us to promise you. But of course, we would expect that the bathrooms would be cleaned more regularly and perhaps more than once a day. Classrooms, however, that's the reason why we do have students leaving early, so that they can go through a thorough and deep cleaning each day, which would include the wiping down of desks and any other frequently touched surfaces. Many of those in common areas throughout the building will be cleaned multiple times throughout the day, in classrooms each and every day.
If someone in my child's class gets COVID, what will happen? Will the whole class have to quarantine?
So if someone in your child's class gets COVID, what would happen? That's a great question. And I know that's on a lot of people's minds. And that's an area where we would absolutely be bringing in our partnership with the Department of Health and be looking to them to help us in navigating what that would look like. And so I don't have a blanket yes or no answer to it. It depends. It depends on the situation. When was the last time that student in class? Who were they in contact with? And that's part of what the Department of Health, being public health officials, they're trained to be able to work with them. And they have also guaranteed us that they're going to be right by our side to help us through those difficult situations when they happen.
When will information be released with regards to Boys and Girls Club, YMCA school programs? Is there a cost associated with the after-school program? And will there be enough spots for younger kids?
So the information regarding after-school programs, I anticipate should be released by the end of this week. The two options for Boys and Girls Club and YMCA will have a small cost associated with them. I know that both of those organizations are also willing to work with families in cases in which they might have some difficulty in making the fee that's might be collected, but it is a nominal fee that'll be charged to families.
Will there be a picture day this year?
So whether or not there'll be a picture day isn't something that we've crossed yet. We've been looking at the clearly the idea of getting people back and having them in place where we're socially distanced and our doors are open. But I would say stay tuned for that. I'm glad you're bringing that up. It hasn't even been something that's been on my mind yet, but it is something we should be thinking about. Stay tuned for more information. Presuming that, because it's a vendor that we rely on to do that work, they're able to work with us and meet the standards that we're setting forth in order to be able to maintain social distancing, health and safety, and disinfection. We'd want to make sure that they could do those things too, just before saying yes. So we would need some time to work through that.
Will masks be available if a child doesn't arrive with one or if they lose it?
So masks will be available for any kids or staff for that matter too, who might say, oh my gosh, I got here and forgot I didn't have it. We will absolutely have them available. Or if you lose it or if it breaks, we'll make sure that we have them available for kids and for staff.
What is the procedure if a child begins to show signs of COVID during the school day?
If a student or a staff member or anyone should begin to show signs of COVID during the school day, each building has set up a room that will serve as a quarantine room. The nurse would step in at that point and they would quarantine and then supervise that person. We would reach out at that point to a parent and direct them either to their primary care physician, urgent care, or the Department of Health and urge testing to happen. We would also work with the parent at that time, or in that case, if it's a staff member, around getting that next level of advice from a healthcare professional. But until a safe return could happen, we might want to work to ensure that testing has happened before, or a proper amount of quarantine has happened before they return to school.
If one sibling has a fever or other symptoms, but the other sibling is fine, can we send the healthy sibling?
So great question. A lot of times, as we know, kids sometimes come down with symptoms, and when you live in the same household, you know how quickly things can travel across households. And I think we've all been susceptible to that at some point or another. I would say in those cases where you have one child who's got symptoms and you're keeping them home and another who's symptom free, that you might, out of an abundance of caution, choose to have them participate in school virtually that day or some other way, just so that we're not putting other kids at risk, just to ensure that they don't also come down with symptoms as well.
What is the plan for PE?
So what is the plan for physical education? And phys ed is one of those things too, that after we get our schedules together, with any of the specials, art, music, we'll want to work with our teachers to make sure that we can put plans into place that can take into account all the safety and health guidelines that we've outlined in our plan and can still ensure for proper physical distancing. And some of those cases with phys ed, if we're able to do them in person and we have them happen, they might happen outdoors to the extent possible, or in places where they're well ventilated, but they might look very different than they have in the past. So a physical education class could also happen virtually, meaning that there are ways that students might participate and interact with their class and their teacher over the computer.
Are buses going to be staggered for drop-off, given the amount of children that will need to be checked every morning, and with an enrollment of 2,600 children, how will social distancing be maintained?
So the great question, buses will be staggered for students coming into school, and the same goes for departure too, because we want to make sure that we can do our best to socially distance children. I would say your help with that would be extremely beneficial as well. Helping kids understand now too the importance of being socially distant, understanding the importance of wearing a mask. If your student hasn't worn a mask regularly, this would be a great time to start practicing with them at home, knowing that that's going to be a requirement for being here. We're going to do our best to be able to limit the flow coming in or exiting out of the building, but we also need your help in working with your children and making sure that they understand and can also, when they're here at school, participate in a safe way.
What is going on with pre-K at Schenectady Day Nursery? It was not listed on the opening plans, and they run based on what the daycare hours are.
So Schenectady Day Nursery, what's going on with Schenectady Day for pre-K? They're not a part of the Schenectady City School District. The district does partner with them as a community-based agency. So they do have some spots, but have many other spots in addition to our universal pre-kindergarten spots that we have available. I would defer you to reach out to Schenectady Day to ask, because they have so many different programs that they offer. They aren't an affiliate of ours, so you would want to direct your question specifically to the Schenectady Day Nursery.
How many kids will be allowed in each classroom?
How many kids will be allowed in each classroom will be dependent wholly on how big the room is. In most cases, as I said, at younger grades, they probably will be no more than around 12 or 13. Higher grades, they might be around 15 or so, but it could be plus or minus that number depending on how large the room is. Because we have so many different buildings, 17 different buildings with various sizes of rooms, depending on the square footage of rooms and the number of desks that we're able to safely fit into the classroom would also determine that as well.
For children participating in the hybrid model, will children have opportunities to take masks off if social distancing is available?
So for children participating in the hybrid model and they're in class, we are asking for kids to wear masks. And if social distancing is available, I can tell you that there will certainly be mask breaks, but the ability to take their mask off, we would ask that that be at the direction of a supervising adult, like a teacher. So a teacher would be the person who would be directing students to be able to take off their mask. So again, working with your students at home, providing some opportunity for practice would be great. And then also using that as an opportunity to say, all right, make sure you're keeping them on until which time someone supervising you is saying, that's okay, now you can take that off.
Are we locked into the 10-week interval for hybrid versus virtual classrooms?
So are you locked into the 10-week interval for virtual versus hybrid? We would ask for parents to commit for 10 weeks at a time. The scheduling of kids becomes quite difficult in order to be able to shift kids around between each of those models. So we are asking people to commit for that 10-week interval, but there will be an opportunity for the next 10 weeks to opt into the other option.
I'm concerned about travel time on the bus and getting to school on time. Is there flexibility with lateness in case of bus issues?
So is there going to be any flexibility with the bus if they're going to be late, especially given the fact that we're going to be running some different schedules? We're trying to accommodate for that. So keep in mind, if you got the bus at a particular time last year, maybe every day the bus came at 7:55, that might not be the same time for the stop this year, and it might not even be the same stop. There will be postcards coming out from the transportation department with specific locations and times that might be slightly earlier in order to be able to accommodate for that. But anytime there's a problem with transportation, we wouldn't want to hold the student accountable for some sort of delay because of a bus breaking down or something else happening. So hopefully those are few and far between, but we are trying to take in the extra time into account.
How will social distancing be enforced if students are not following the rules?
So how will social distancing be enforced if students are not following the rules? I think that's a great question. We certainly want to do our best to be able to remind students whenever possible if they need a reminder, but we also need your help in supporting that as well. We will be asking for families who selected the in-person hybrid option for their student to sign a compact. And it'll be an extension of our code of conduct that they understand that their coming back to school does necessitate the need for them to follow social distancing and wearing of masks. That is a little bit different. We're looking at it as very different than just a normal type of thing that a kid might do as a misbehavior, because this is an issue, of course, that affects the health and safety of other kids or other adults in the building too. So we do want to take that very seriously. If it was something in which a student continued to have a difficult time in being able to follow, that compact will outline that we may be asking students to now engage in that virtual option because of their inability to be able to follow the guidelines that we put into place for a safe return to school.
Some families chose virtual due to the lack of information. Could they change their mind now?
Some families chose virtual because of the lack of information. If there is something that you're contemplating right now, I would say that you should certainly get on the phone to your school right now and try to speak to someone. We are finalizing things as we speak. So if you have an outstanding situation and feel that there's a compelling reason to change it, please make that call now, because we are locking things in as we speak.
How will pre-K work?
So if you're joining pre-K, it would work exactly how I'm describing this, with the same type of schedule if you're coming in person. We do have, or are planning, of course, a remote option for that as well too. So it would follow the same type of schedule, and it would be synchronous learning, whether it's in person or virtual.
When will we be receiving information about how the drop-off, pickup will run for the school?
So information about drop-off and pickup will come with student schedules. So as soon as we have those available and start sending them out, we'll make that information available for parents as well.
Will you be doing temperature checks before students enter the classroom?
Will we be doing temperature checks? Yes. So before students enter school, not the classroom, before they enter school, we will be doing temperature checks. It's actually our plan that we would be doing temperature checks for any kids getting on a bus as they get on the bus, and a health screening. And then any kids who are dropped off to school or walk to school, we would be doing that as they enter the building. So that would be conducted each and every day, and for staff as well.
Will students be penalized if they are not able to get onto the virtual classrooms in the afternoon?
Will students be penalized if they're not able to get in the virtual classrooms for the afternoon? We are looking at the commitment to that hybrid schedule to also participate virtually as well. The school day isn't complete after dismissal. It actually continues after dismissal. So we would be looking for students' participation in those afternoon courses. It becomes difficult, of course, when a student is needing course credit, especially for graduation, if they're not participating. So there is the possibility a student could be penalized for not participating. So I would want to urge you to make sure that students are participating in the virtual component of the day as well.
When a child is sick with the virus, what happens to the school?
When a child is sick with the virus, what would happen to the school? Again, it's an it depends situation, and we would partner at that point again with the Department of Health. We would take their direction in that. And there are so many different combinations and permutations. And it could be anything from, depending on the last point of contact, that everything's fine. It could be a classroom being quarantined. It could be the school quarantining for a period of time. And I think that alludes to the fact too, why I said it'll be important regardless of what option you pick. If we were to go completely virtual, it might have to be at a moment's notice. So even if you're picking our hybrid option and coming in person, you might want to still have some sort of childcare option in the background in case you get that call saying there is a situation that's requiring us to be able to close down a school. And even though your child might not have been anywhere near them, you might still need a situation where you're relying on last minute childcare.
When doing work from home after school gets released, will the virtual part of the school be recorded, or will they be in front of their live teacher?
So when students are dismissed and go home for the virtual part of their day, they will still be participating in what we would call synchronous learning in front of a teacher. So while they're logged into the computer, they still will be in front of a teacher and other classmates.
Why was 10th and 11th grade not prioritized for daily hybrid instruction? instead of the every other week model?
So 10th and 11th grade were not prioritized because of the necessity for 9th grade and 12th grade, both as entering into the high school and then 12th graders for graduating and leaving the high school. We wanted to make sure that our priority was given to them while still having the ability to reduce the number of students entering into the high school facility. So earlier on in the presentation, and I know some people joined late, I mentioned that based on the numbers that we have, there is a possibility we could be switching that to being an everyday versus every other week model. So stay tuned for that as we firm that up.
Will we be able to meet the teacher this year?
So will you be able to meet the teacher this year? We still plan on having, at this point, the regular open houses that we've had before and parent-teacher conferences. They might look differently than they have in the past. They're still on our calendar. We're still intending to have them. They just might not be the normal meet and greet that we've had in past years, but I would say stay tuned for additional information around that.
How are the teachers feeling?
How are the teachers feeling? I think that that's a really good question, and I think it's an also it depends. Just like anyone you're probably interacting with, there's a wide range of emotions, and I think there's certainly a strong contingent of people who are saying, I can't wait to be back and I can't wait to be in front of kids. We all have our concerns and anxieties over it, but this is what I do. And then there's others who, just based on information that we're hearing, of course they have their concerns too. So I think just like we're seeing in society and on the news, there's a wide range of emotions around that, but we're doing our best to be able to work with each and every person.
What are the plans for students with an IEP?
So what are the plans for students with an IEP? We would be working to implement all of the accommodations or goals as outlined in the IEP, regardless of the option that a student chose. So any student who is coming for the hybrid option or virtual, we would still be looking to meet the goals as outlined in the IEP. I would also say too, for any students who are in a self-contained classroom, all of which those students would have an IEP, we would be prioritizing them for daily instruction.
Are we still allowed to drop children off at the school at 7:30 a.m.? And then if so, how will you distance them as previously they were held in a classroom until school started?
Okay, so there is not going to be any pre-care available in any of our schools. Some of the partners that we're working with, such as the Boys and Girls Club or YMCA, will have that available as an option, but that is not an option that we'll have available at school because we will be not having large gatherings of kids like we've had in the past. So if you rely on that, I would ask you to look for another way to have supervision happen, because when kids arrive, they'll be going directly to their classroom and directly to their desk, just so that we can maintain cohorts of kids staying together.
So our kindergartner will have to sit in front of a screen for 3 hours each morning, seeing other kids who get to be there in person. Are you imagining activities or just sitting and watching?
So the kindergartners sitting in front of a screen for 3 hours watching while other kids get to be there. In most cases, if you're logging into school virtually, you're participating with kids who are also virtual too. You're not participating with kids who are in person, but I also know that our kindergarten teachers are planning lots of activities just so that we can make sure that it isn't just sitting and watching and a teacher delivering lessons. And I would say that that applies not just to kindergarten, but any grade level, but that's also why it's a choice. We want to make sure that it's a choice that's the right choice for parents and for students and for families. Kindergarten, of course, is always a tough one. Kindergarten is about social interaction and play, but our kindergarten teachers are up for the challenge of using the virtual world as an opportunity to still integrate them into the work that they do with kids. Certainly not perfect, certainly wouldn't be something that's going to replace that in-person interaction and the interaction between kids, but we're going to do our best to be able to do that.
If parents signed up their child to be in the virtual academy, can they still get childcare for the evening?
If parents signed up for the virtual academy, can they still get childcare for the evening? I don't see any reason why not. I would say please contact one of those providers and they should be able to direct you. And again, contact information for that will be on our website, hopefully by the end of this week, with specifically who you should reach out to and any additional information they've been able to share with us. But I don't see why that wouldn't be an option.
How many children are you allowing on the bus?
So the number of children allowed on the bus is going to be dictated by a couple of different factors. So one, we are going to have seating charts. We want to make sure that we're spacing kids out and are able to socially distance them, but we might be able to have more kids on a bus if it's families coming on the bus. So if we're able to seat families together, we can then have more students on the bus. But the capacity of the bus would never exceed 50% of what's allowed by the bus. In most cases, it would be 1/3 to 1/2 of what is normally allowed on the bus.
How much does the virtual learning count against the student's grade?
Virtual learning counting against students' grade shouldn't be the case at all. A student who participates in virtual learning versus a student who comes to the hybrid in-person option should have a very similar experience. We're doing our best to make sure the work that happens in either of those scenarios is also something that is contiguous between both groups. Also understanding that there could be an option where someone might want to switch after those 10 weeks. We'd want to make sure that their switching is also a continuous learning. I do want to point out too that we have just probably our last minute left, so I want to make sure if there were any questions that weren't answered yet, we're going to make sure we answer them as a part of a published Q&A document. We will get that published out there for you too. And this will also be published, the recording of this along with the answers provided. And we will also provide the rest of the questions that were answered as well. But we have time for one more question.
Will parents be informed when there is a positive COVID case in their school or classroom?
So if there is a positive case of COVID in a classroom or school, it would be the practice of the district to notify parents. We, of course, wouldn't be naming who the student is, but would notify you that there was a case just so that you were aware of that. And we would do that as quickly as possible so that you became aware. I do want to thank everyone. I know that the time certainly went by fast. I hope that we were able to provide you with some information to make your decision about the option that you choose feel more comfortable. And I know it is very much a personal decision for each and every one of you. We tried to take that into account in the development of our plan. And we know that things change and evolve. And that's certainly the nature of our working through a pandemic for the first time. I appreciate every one of you for participating. I appreciate your involvement in this. And please stay tuned to our website as we continue to provide updates. In addition to that, Let's Talk, as I mentioned before, is another avenue for you to submit questions. Once again, thank you to you, and thank you to the panelists for assisting me and moderating today's chat. I hope you all have a great afternoon. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.